What would you do for love? Would you lie? Would you steal? Would you go to prison for 6 years to protect someone you loved? Tonight, I'm going to tell you about a man who did all that and more. A man who thought love meant sacrifice. A man who learned the hard way that sometimes the person you die for is the very person who's been killing you slowly, piece by piece. Picture this. A street-smart player from Harlem. The kind of man who never got played because he knew all the games. Cornell Washington was untouchable until he met her. Brenda Martinez was the kind of woman who could make a player forget his own rules. And when Cornell fell, he fell hard enough to shatter everything he thought he knew about himself. But here's where the story gets twisted. When the feds came knocking, Cornell didn't just take the blame. He volunteered for it. He looked the woman he loved in the eyes and said, "I got this. You take care of everything while I'm gone." He left her $2 million, a beautiful home, and a promise. "When I return, we'll build the empire we always dreamed of." 6 years later, Cornell walked out of those prison gates, ready to claim his queen and his kingdom. Instead, he found her living in her car. The money? Gone. The house? Sold. The woman he'd protected? She'd been working with the very agents who put him behind bars. But that's not even the worst part. This isn't just another true crime story. This is a masterclass in how love can become obsession, how loyalty can become stupidity, and how betrayal can turn a good man into something he never thought he could be. By the end of this video, you're going to question everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the prices we pay for both. Before we dive into this incredible true story, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring that notification bell, because Ruthless Realities brings you the stories other channels won't touch. We go deep, we go real, and we don't sugarcoat anything. Let's get into it. Cornell Washington didn't just walk through Harlem. He owned every block he stepped on. At 32, he had the kind of presence that made other men step aside and women take notice. 6'2", with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of his neighborhood's respect. Cornell had built himself from nothing into something that mattered. And Cornell was a player in every sense of the word. He had 3 different women he'd take to 3 different restaurants on 3 different nights of the week. He had a construction business that was legitimate enough to satisfy the IRS and profitable enough to afford him the lifestyle he wanted. He had a crew that respected him, a family that loved him, and a reputation that preceded him wherever he went. Cornell Washington was untouchable until the day he touched her. Brenda Martinez was 30 years old and devastating in a way that should have come with a warning label. She wasn't just beautiful. She was strategically gorgeous. Every curve was calculated. Every smile was currency. And every man who thought he could handle her quickly learned. Brenda Martinez didn't get handled by anybody. When Cornell first saw her at Marcus Barbershop on 125th Street, she was handling business like the boss she was. Her 10-year-old son, Tiro's father was giving her grief about child support. And Cornell watched Brenda shut that man down with a kind of cold precision that made him think. She could run the world if she wanted to. "Excuse me," Cornell said, approaching her after the confrontation ended. His usual smooth delivery was still there, but something in his voice was different. "You handle that real smooth. Most people would have been screaming." Brenda looked him up and down with the kind of assessment that could price a man's soul in seconds. She saw the expensive construction boots, the careful fade, the way he carried himself like he owned everything he looked at. She liked what she saw. "Most people don't know how to get what they want without losing their dignity," she replied, her Brooklyn confidence making every word sound like a challenge. And that's when Cornell Washington, the player who'd never been played, fell completely and hopelessly in love. What happened next was a masterclass in how a smart man can make stupid decisions when his heart gets involved. Cornell, who'd never spent more than $300 on any woman, dropped $2,000 on Brenda's first birthday gift. Cornell, who'd never introduced any woman to his family, brought Brenda to his grandmother's Sunday dinner after knowing her for 3 weeks. Cornell, who'd built his entire reputation on never catching feelings, was walking around Harlem holding Brenda's hand like a teenager with his first girlfriend. "You know what I like about you? Brenda said one evening as they sat in his apartment, her head on his chest while they watched the city lights twinkle through his window. "You're not trying to impress me. You're just real." If Cornell had been thinking clearly, he would have recognized that line for what it was. The same thing every player says to make someone feel special. But Cornell wasn't thinking clearly anymore. He was thinking with his heart, and his heart was telling him that Brenda Martinez was the missing piece he didn't even know he was looking for. Within 6 months, Cornell had moved Brenda and Tyrell into a beautiful house in Queens. He'd gone from being the man who collected hearts to the man who'd given his life completely. And Tyrell? Cornell embraced that boy like he was his own blood. Teaching him how to throw a football, helping him with homework, becoming a father figure the kid had never had. Pops, Tyrell would call him. And each time Cornell heard it, he fell a little deeper into the fantasy that this was his family, his life, his forever. But here's what Cornell didn't know. While he was building a family, Brenda was building an exit strategy, because Brenda Martinez had expensive taste and bigger dreams than any legitimate income could handle. She loved Cornell, sure, but she loved the idea of financial security more. And when Cornell's construction business couldn't keep up with her designer bag habit and dreams of Miami vacations, Brenda started planting seeds. "Baby," she said one evening, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "You know I love you, right? But love don't pay for the life I want us to have." That's when Brenda introduced Cornell to her world. A world where fast money moved through underground networks. Where people who knew the right people could turn thousands into hundreds of thousands overnight. A world where legitimate construction business could become the perfect cover for activities that would fund the lifestyle Brenda had been dreaming of. Cornell knew it was dangerous. His grandmother had raised him better than that. But when you're watching the woman you love slip away because you can't give her what she wants, danger starts looking like necessity. Within a year, Cornell and Brenda were running a sophisticated operation that moved goods through construction sites across the city. Cornell's business became the perfect front, and for the first time since they'd been together, he had enough money to make Brenda smile the way she smiled in his dreams. They were partners in everything. Or so Cornell thought. What he didn't know was that Brenda was already 3 moves ahead, playing a game that Cornell didn't even know had started. And when the federal agents came knocking, Cornell would learn that the woman he'd die for had already decided he was going to. February 15th, 2017 started like every other day in Cornell's world. He woke up at 5:30, kissed a sleeping Brenda goodbye, and headed to a construction site in Brooklyn, believing he was building an empire with the woman he loved. He had no idea he was walking into the last day of his freedom. The federal investigation had been building for months, but not in the way Cornell thought. While he believed their operation was invisible, moving through legitimate channels with surgical precision, someone had been feeding information to law enforcement from the very beginning. Someone who knew their schedules, their methods, their weaknesses. Someone who slept in Cornell's bed every night. At 2:47 p.m., Cornell's phone buzzed with a call from Brenda. Her voice was shaking, but not with the fear Cornell expected. "Baby, they're here," she whispered. "Federal agents. They're at the house with a warrant." Cornell's blood went cold. "Where's Terrell?" "He's at school." "Cornell, what do we do?" Through a construction trailer window, Cornell could see black SUVs surrounding a site like wolves circling prey. Federal agents were already questioning his workers, and Cornell knew exactly what they were looking for. But here's where Cornell's love for Brenda revealed both the best and worst of who he was as a man. Cornell could have run. His truck was parked where the agents couldn't see it, and he knew back roads through Brooklyn that could get him to the highway before anyone realized he was gone. He could have called his lawyer, negotiated a deal, or pointed fingers at the people above him in the operation. Instead, he made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Brenda, listen to me carefully," Cornell said, watching agents approach his trailer. "You were never part of this. You didn't know anything about the business. Whatever they ask you, you tell them I handled everything alone." "Cornell, no." "Yes." He interrupted, his voice filled with the kind of certainty that comes from loving someone more than you love yourself. "You have Terrell to think about. You can't go to prison. I won't let that happen." And in that moment, Cornell Washington signed his own death warrant. When the agents arrested him 20 minutes later, Cornell didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't demand to know the charges. He simply asked one question: "Are you going to arrest Brenda too?" "That depends on what you tell us," the lead agent replied. Cornell told them everything they wanted to hear. He painted himself as the mastermind of the entire operation and Brenda as an innocent girlfriend who knew nothing about his illegal activities. He constructed a narrative that would keep the woman he loved out of prison, believing he was saving her life. What Cornell didn't know was that Brenda had been constructing her own narrative for months. Here's the twist that makes this story so devastating. Brenda had been cooperating with federal agents for almost a year. The investigation hadn't started because they got sloppy. It started because Brenda had been caught in a smaller operation 6 months earlier, something Cornell never knew about. Instead of facing charges, she made a deal: information about Cornell's business in exchange for complete immunity from prosecution. But Brenda's plan wasn't to destroy Cornell. Her original intention was to give the agents just enough information to shut down the operation without anyone going to prison. She thought they could both walk away clean and start over somewhere else with the money they'd already made. She underestimated how badly the federal government wanted to make an example of someone. The agents pushed for more information. They threatened to charge her as a co-conspirator. They threatened to arrest Tyrell's father on old charges, leaving her son with no parents. Gradually, they backed Brenda into a corner, where betraying Cornell completely was the only way to protect herself and her child. By the time Cornell was arrested, Brenda had given statements that painted him as a sole mastermind of an operation she'd been trying to distance herself from for months. Cornell's noble sacrifice wasn't just unnecessary. It was exactly what the prosecution needed to ensure he'd go away for years. As the agents put Cornell in handcuffs and led him toward their car, Brenda was standing in the doorway of their house, watching the man she claimed to love get taken away for crimes they committed together. "I'll wait for you, baby," she called out as they put him in the back seat. "I'll take care of everything until you come home. I promise." Cornell believed every word, even as the car drove away from everything he'd built, even as he watched his house disappear in the rearview mirror. He held on to those words like a lifeline. He had no idea that Brenda had already started planning a life that didn't include him in it. Cornell Washington, the player who'd never been played, was about to spend 6 years learning that the biggest game of his life had been rigged from the start. And the woman he protected? She was about to show him that some betrayals cut so deep, they change who you are forever. Because love had made Cornell a fool. And prison was about to make him something much more dangerous. Sing Sing Correctional Facility became Cornell's world for what was supposed to be 6 years. But when you're counting days until you can reclaim a life that someone else is living for you, time doesn't just move slowly. It tortures you with every tick of the clock. Cornell's first night in prison, he called Brenda collect. The sound of her voice accepting the charges felt like medicine for a wound that was still bleeding. "Baby, I'm so sorry," she whispered into the phone, her voice carrying all the pain Cornell needed to hear. "This is all my fault." If only Cornell had known how right she was. "Don't you dare blame yourself," Cornell replied, his voice echoing in the concrete phone booth. "You didn't do anything wrong. I made my choices, and I'd make them again to protect you and Tyrell." For the first year, Brenda was everything Cornell needed her to be. She visited every other weekend, bringing pictures of Tyrell's soccer games and updates about the house. She deposited money into his commissary account religiously and wrote letters that kept hope alive in a place designed to kill it. "I'm investing the money wisely," she promised during one visit, her hand pressed against the glass that separated them. "When you come home, we're going to have everything we ever dreamed of and more." Cornell believed every word, because he had to. In prison, hope isn't just emotional survival. It's the difference between rehabilitation and becoming someone your family won't recognize when you return. But hope built on lies is like a house built on sand. Eventually, the foundation crumbles. By year 2, Brenda's visits became monthly instead of bi-weekly. Her letters, once filled with love and detailed plans for the future, became shorter and more generic. The photos she brought were older, and the stories about Terrell began to sound rehearsed. "I'm just busy with work," she explained when Cornell asked about the change. "Terrell's been having some problems at school, and I'm trying to keep everything together for when you come home." Cornell's cellmate, an older man named Raymond who'd been down for 12 years, watched Cornell read those increasingly short letters with the kind of sadness that comes from experience. "Young blood," Raymond said one evening as Cornell stared at a 2-sentence letter that used to be 2 pages. "When someone starts changing on you while you're locked up, it ain't because they're busy. It's because they're becoming someone else." Cornell didn't want to hear it. He couldn't afford to hear it. But the signs were becoming impossible to ignore. Phone calls that used to last until the 15-minute limit were ending after 5 minutes. Questions about Cornell's release date were met with subject changes. And when Cornell asked Brenda about visiting him for his birthday, her excuse broke something inside his chest. "I can't make it this weekend, baby. I'm not feeling well. The flu or something." The next day, Cornell called Brenda's number 17 times. She didn't answer a single one. When she finally called him back 3 days later, her excuse was simple. "My phone died, and I forgot to charge it for a couple days. You know how I am with technology." But Cornell was learning to read between the lies. The woman he'd sacrificed everything for was living a life that didn't include making space for his phone calls. By year 4, the truth was becoming undeniable. Brenda's visits stopped altogether. Her letters became birthday cards and Christmas cards with generic messages that could have been written to anyone. And when Cornell's mother died suddenly of a heart attack, Brenda didn't even show up to the funeral. Cornell was granted 2 days temporary release to attend his mother's services. And that's when he learned the first devastating truth about what Brenda had been doing with his freedom and his money. "Son," his Aunt Patricia said as they stood beside his mother's grave, her voice heavy with reluctance. "I don't know how to tell you this, but Brenda sold a house." The words hit Cornell like a physical blow. "What do you mean she sold the house?" 6 months ago, Patricia said quietly. Said it was too much for her to maintain alone. Patricia's voice trailed off like she was afraid to finish. "But what, Aunt Pat?" "She's been seen around town with different men. Young men. And word on the street is she's been gambling heavy at that new casino in Queens. People are saying she got some kind of surgery, too. Changed her whole look." Cornell's legs almost gave out. The house wasn't just their home. It was their future. They'd planned to raise Terrell there. Dreamed of growing old in those rooms. And Brenda had sold their dreams without even telling him. That night, Cornell called Brenda from his mother's house. When she answered, her voice had the lazy quality that comes from drinking too much wine. "Cornell, baby, I'm so sorry about your mama. I wanted to be there, but I've been so sick lately. Why didn't you tell me about the house?" The silence stretched so long, Cornell thought the call had dropped. "The house was too expensive to maintain," she finally said, but her voice lacked the conviction it used to carry. "I did what I had to do to survive. Where's the money from the sale? Where's the $2 million I left you?" Another long pause. In the background, Cornell could hear music, male voices laughing, and the sound of someone calling Brenda's name in a way that was far too familiar. "I invested it. When you come home, we'll talk about everything. Brenda, where are you right now?" "I'm at home." "That's a lie, and we both know it." "Cornell, don't start." "I said that's a lie." Cornell's voice cracked with for years of suppressed pain. "You're not home because we don't have a home anymore. You sold our home, and you didn't even tell me." The fight that followed lasted until Brenda hung up on him. It was the last real conversation they would have for 2 years. Cornell returned to prison a different man. The hope that had sustained him was replaced by a cold understanding. The woman he protected had been destroying everything he protected her for. But the worst betrayal was still coming. And when Cornell finally learned the truth about what Brenda had really been doing with his sacrifice, it would set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. Because sometimes the person you die for is already killing everything you live for. Prison has a way of stripping away everything except the truth. And by year 5, Cornell was finally ready to face truths he'd been avoiding since the day he was arrested. The first truth came from an unexpected source, Tyrell himself. Brenda's son, now 17 years old, had been writing to Cornell secretly for months. The letters were hidden in packages from Cornell's cousin. And what Tyrell revealed broke Cornell's heart. "Mr. Cornell, I don't know if I should tell you this, but I think you deserve to know the truth about my mom. She isn't the same person anymore. She's been gone most nights for the past year. Sometimes she doesn't come home for days. My grandmother has been taking care of me, but she's getting older, and I don't think she can do it much longer." The letter continued with details that painted a picture of complete abandonment. Brenda wasn't just neglecting Cornell. She was neglecting her own son. She got surgery last year. Something about making her body look different. She spent a lot of money on it, and on new clothes and jewelry. When I ask her about you, she changes the subject. When I ask when you're coming home, she acts like she doesn't even remember your name. Cornell read that letter 17 times before he finally accepted what it was telling him. The woman he'd spent 5 years dreaming about didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never had. That night, Cornell called his cousin Marcus collect. "Mark, I need you to tell me the truth about Brenda. All of it. No more protecting my feelings." Marcus' heavy sigh told Cornell everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken. "'Cause I've been waiting 3 years for you to ask me this question." What Marcus told him next destroyed whatever was left of Cornell's heart. But the most devastating revelation was still coming. "Cornell, man, there's something else. Something I really didn't want to tell you over the phone, but I can't let you come home blind to what really happened. Just tell me, Mark. Brenda's been working with the feds the whole time you were together, not just when you got arrested. The whole damn time. Your old caseworker let it slip during a conversation about your release. She's been feeding them information about other people in the neighborhood, too. People who trusted her because they thought she was your girl." The phone slipped from Cornell's hand and clattered against the wall. Everything Cornell thought he knew about his relationship, his arrest, and his sacrifice was a lie. Brenda hadn't just betrayed him after he went to prison. She'd been betraying him from the very beginning. That night, Cornell didn't sleep. He lay in his narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their relationship through the lens of this new information. October 12th, 2023. After 6 years, 2 months, and 14 days, Cornell Washington walked out of Sing Sing Correctional Facility, carrying everything he owned in a brown paper bag and wearing clothes that no longer fit the man he'd become. His cousin Marcus was waiting by the gate with a car and a smile that couldn't hide the worry in his eyes. "Welcome home, cuz," Marcus said, embracing Cornell carefully, like he was afraid his cousin might shatter. Cornell looked different. Prison had carved away every soft edge of the man who'd gone in. His frame was leaner but more muscular, his eyes harder, and something fundamental had shifted in the way he carried himself. The player was gone. What remained was something colder, more focused, more dangerous. "How you feeling?" Marcus asked as they drove through streets Cornell hadn't seen as a free man since 2017. "Empty," Cornell replied, staring out the window at a world that had moved on without him. "Like I died in there, and I'm just now finding out." Marcus had prepared a small apartment in the Bronx for Cornell's return. Nothing fancy, but clean and furnished with the basics. More importantly, it was nowhere near Queens, where Brenda had last been living. "I found you a job," Marcus said as they climbed the stairs to the second floor. "Construction gig in Manhattan. The foreman knows your situation, and he's willing to give you a chance." Cornell nodded absently. Work wasn't what was on his mind. "Where is she, Mark?" Marcus had been dreading this question for months. "Cornell, man, you need to focus on rebuilding your own life. Brenda she's not your problem anymore." Cornell's voice, when he spoke again, carried a tone that made Marcus stop walking. "Where is she?" Cornell spent his first week of freedom working construction during the day and hunting for information about Brenda at night. It wasn't hard to find people willing to talk about her downfall. Her story had become neighborhood gossip, a cautionary tale told in barbershops and corner stores. The picture they painted was devastating and infuriating in equal measure. Brenda had blown through the $2 million in less than 3 years. The Brazilian, but lift she'd gotten cost $40,000. Designer clothes, jewelry, and trips to Miami with men half her age had consumed hundreds of thousands more. But the biggest drain had been a gambling addiction that turned weekly casino visits into daily obsessions. She'd hit Atlantic City 4 times a week, said Maria, who worked at the corner store where Brenda used to buy lottery tickets. Always talking about the big win that was coming. Always sure the next bet would fix everything. But what hurt Cornell most was learning about Terrell. Brenda's son, now 17, had been essentially raising himself for the past 2 years. He was a senior in high school, maintaining good grades despite everything, working part-time to help his elderly grandmother with bills, and had already been accepted to community college, without any support from his mother. When Cornell finally tracked down Terrell at his grandmother's house, the conversation broke his heart all over again. "Mr. Cornell," Terrell said, now a 17-year-old young man with his mother's eyes but his grandmother's wisdom, "I want you to know that what happened to you wasn't right. My mom, she's not well. She hasn't been well for a long time." "Where is she now?" Terrell's expression grew pained. "She's been living in her car for the past month. Sometimes she parks outside the old house she used to share, just sitting there for hours. I think she's finally realizing what she threw away. But it's too late now." That night, Cornell drove to the house he'd bought for Brenda 6 years earlier. It looked different. New owners had painted it blue and added a garden, but it was still the symbol of everything he'd worked for and lost. And there, parked across the street under a broken streetlight, was a beat-up Toyota Camry. Cornell sat in his cousin's borrowed Honda for 20 minutes, watching the shadow of a figure in the driver's seat. Part of him wanted to drive away and never look back. Part of him wanted to get out and confront her immediately. But mostly, he felt a cold rage building inside him, something he'd never experienced before. Cornell approached the car slowly, his footsteps echoing in the quiet suburban street. When he tapped on the driver's side window, the figure inside jumped like they'd been shocked. It was Brenda, but it wasn't the Brenda he remembered. 6 years had not been kind to her. The expensive surgeries had given her an artificial look that hadn't aged well. Her hair, once perfectly maintained, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. At 37, she looked older, harder, and somehow smaller than the woman who used to command attention everywhere she went. When she rolled down the window, her eyes were red from crying. "Cornell," she whispered, like she was seeing a ghost. "Brenda." They stared at each other. 6 years of history, and hurt hanging between them. "You look, she started, then stopped. "Different," Cornell finished. "Yeah, prison will do that to you. Can we talk?" Brenda asked, vulnerability in her voice. Cornell got in the passenger side. The car smelled like fast food and desperation. Garbage bags in the back seat contained everything she owned. "This is what's left," she said. "This car and those bags." "What happened to the money, Brenda?" She laughed bitterly. "I spent it trying to become someone I thought I wanted to be." Brenda confessed everything. The gambling addiction, the men, the surgeries that left her feeling artificial. "I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me," she cried. "I took your love for granted." "But you can't come back to it," Cornell said quietly. Then Brenda sealed her fate. "Do you think we could start over? I'm different now." Cornell's laugh was ice cold. "Start over? With the woman who sold our house? Who worked with the feds? Who destroyed my life? I made mistakes." "You made choices," Cornell exploded. "Every day for 6 years, you chose to betray everything I sacrificed for." Cornell pulled out a gun and started crying. Brenda lunged to the door. They struggled in the confined space. In that chaos, Cornell's finger found the trigger. Brenda slumped forward, blood spreading across her shirt. Cornell sat there for 4 minutes before police arrived. As they handcuffed him, he said only, "I loved her more than life itself, and she killed me for it, so I returned the favor." The story exploded across social media within hours. Some saw Cornell as a victim, pushed beyond his breaking point. Others saw him as a possessive man who committed the ultimate act of control. The legal proceedings were swift. Cornell pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, accepting full responsibility for Brenda's death while maintaining he never intended to kill her. His defense argued that 6 years of emotional manipulation and betrayal created a mental state that made him temporarily incapable of rational thought. The prosecution painted him as a man who had planned Brenda's death from the moment he learned about her betrayals. The truth lay somewhere in between. Cornell was sentenced to 15 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter. He'll be eligible for parole in 10 years, when he's 49 years old. As they led him away to begin his second stint in prison, Terrell watched from the courtroom gallery, the man who'd once been like a father to him disappearing behind bars again. Today, Cornell sits in a different prison cell, serving a different sentence. The man who once controlled Harlem's streets now spends his days in anger management and victim advocacy programs. "I thought love meant sacrificing everything," he told a therapist. "Now, I think real love means letting people make their own choices, even when they hurt you. Real love means walking away when staying becomes toxic. But these realizations came too late to save Brenda Martinez." Cornell's story forces uncomfortable questions about love and loyalty. Was he a victim pushed too far, or a possessive man whose love was always dangerous? The truth is, they were both victims and perpetrators of a love story built on weak foundations. Cornell was a player who got played by the ultimate game, the game of the heart. So there you have it, Cornell and Brenda's devastating story, a love story that became a cautionary tale about loving too hard and trusting too deeply. What's your take? Was Cornell a victim or a possessive man? Was Brenda a manipulator or a woman trying to survive? There are probably people watching who see themselves in this story. People who loved so completely they lost themselves or made mistakes they couldn't take back. If this resonated with you, smash that subscribe button. Drop a comment. What would you have done? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. This is Ruthless Realities. Until next time.